Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Well, Peter, there's been some very strange intellectual movements going on in the last few days among conservatives, no less.
Yes.
They've been likening Joe Biden to former President Jimmy Carter. Now, I find it odd for a number of reasons. In the first place, Jimmy Carter was president an awfully long time ago. So in order to even understand what that reference means, you already have to be at least over the age of 50. Because you at least have a living memory of the Carter years. The second part of it is that I don't fully understand is I'm not clear what the argument is supposed to be. Is it that under Carter everything was terrible and America was going, hell in a handbasket? Or was it that Carter was very gloomy and pessimistic and a downer? But of course, if everything was terrible under Carter, then no wonder he was kind of gloomy and pessimistic. So I am genuinely puzzled about that. The other thing is this: Carter is today seen as a kind of a benign, well-meaning, good person. So he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He, let us not forget, served in World War II. Unlike, incidentally, Ronald Reagan, he's kind of antithesis. Reagan was kind of part of the motion picture unit, so he got to go home every night in his Los Angeles home. Carter was, served on a submarine. So he was that. But his policies, and we can get into that, were by no means soft and benign. He pursued a very, very tough policy. And in fact, the Reagan administration policy, the buildup and everything was really just a continuation of what Carter had been doing. Moreover, he did have some foreign policy accomplishments. I mean, the Camp David Accords, admittedly, America was just simply a mediator there. Nonetheless, it's one of the few peace agreements that there have been in the Middle East, and it did take place under Carter. So I'm genuinely puzzled why Laura Ingraham in particular, night after night, brings up Jimmy Carter. I genuinely don't understand what point she's making, unless it's part of her essentially worship of Ronald Reagan as simply, oh, Reagan, he rescued us from horrible, horrible Jimmy Carter. But otherwise, I don't get it. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree too. I think that the immediate empirical evidence that they show us is because of the Colonial Pipeline. Apparently it's pumping oil again. Okay, probably with this time Saturday, Sunday, it'll probably quote unquote be back to normal. So I think that they're using those visuals there because I remember it. I was very young, but I'm even in odd days getting gas. But that wasn't the problem with the pipeline. It was a systemic change in the oil markets. Okay, I mean, something that was beyond Jimmy Carter's control as well. Maybe he could have reacted to it differently. Fine, that's debatable. Right. But I mean, it wasn't his fault that the oil prices spiked. Okay, right. He was reacting to it. So I think that that's one thing. Obviously. Joe Biden's presentation of himself is kind of spooky at times. I mean, he's obviously having a bit of a trouble. Constantly criticizing him the way Hannity does, I think is just unconscionable. I see no point in it, okay? So, Carter is weak, Joe is weak, but Carter wasn't weak. He's actually was a very introspective person. I mean, he was a nuclear physicist, okay? He was no fool. Actually, he was a good entrepreneur as well, people forget. They made fun of him. He was a peanut farmer. He was a wealthy peanut farmer. And there's another criticism, I mean, it cuts both ways, is that Jimmy Carter was a president that wore white gloves to work every day because he went through everything. I mean, if any president really owns his administration, Jimmy Carter, for better or worse, he owned it. Okay. Right. And then Joe, well, we don't know what he does most of the time, and I'm not going to speculate. All right. So, I mean, the comparisons are really loose. And then at the end of the day, it's kind of early, George. I mean,
it's very early. And I think that you raised a lot of very good points there, because if one thinks about stagflation, well, that is very early days, whether we're heading towards stagflation. We don't know that. Moreover, the stagflation that took place under Carter, well, really wasn't his fault. I mean, in the first place, there was the first oil shock in the 1970s. And then also under Carter's watch, there was the second oil shock. The inflation was something that he had inherited. I mean, because America in the 1960s was trying to fund the Great Society program, plus a massive Vietnam War. And it couldn't do it.
And remember Joel Ford's whip inflation now buttons?
That's right. That's right. And so in the end, Carter, he hired Paul Volcker as the head of the Fed, and his job, it was Volcker's policy, not even Carter's, was to squeeze inflation out of the economy. Well, that's when you get 20% interest rates. I mean, it was brutal, and the economy suffered. But that was the remedy that was sought to get rid of inflation. I mean, inflation was a terrible thing. So, but you can't blame Carter. Carter wasn't exactly a spendthrift. I mean, he wasn't somebody, hey, let's fund lots of lavish government programs. In fact, Carter was against all of that. He was a kind of a centrist within the Democratic Party. I mean, in a way, he was a kind of a new Democrat before Bill Clinton. So it's
because he was alone. I mean, he had no real. I mean, the party didn't love him. Okay,
no, not at all. No. And remember, and this is kind of often forgotten about Carter. He was from the South, and he won in 1976 because the George Wallace voters all went over to Jimmy Carter. I mean, they saw him as one of their own. They, of course, then eventually turned on him in 1980, which is why Carter lost. But he did tap into that whole George Wallace vote. So he was no George McGovern, Walter Mondale type liberal. He was able to get that Southern Democrat vote. But again, if you look at those policies, in particular on foreign policy, he was, he launched the Mujahideen, which we can certainly get into that. He launched the Contras. The Contras were launched under Jimmy Carter, not under Ronald Reagan, and the massive military buildup, again, which was something Reagan inherited. So all of that started under Jimmy Carter. So the idea of making him into this ineffectual, doddering kind of wimp, no, that's not who Carter was.
Well, I mean, and since his departure from office, that's been the caricature. I mean, very few people are very interested in going into the minutia about his administration. You just did for a few seconds there, and it was very good. But most people know he's anonymous with melees. He's anonymous with weakness. He's anonymous with gloom. The thing is, we have to remember one of the reasons why he was elected is because it was in the wake of defeat in Vietnam and the Watergate saga. And Gerald Ford, for better or worse, he was rejected by the electorate because of the pardon, and people were angry about that. Okay, and so and then another kind of weird thing to think about here is that, as I said, Jimmy Carter was essentially alone. I mean, he wasn't really a creature of the party. He was on, I don't know if our viewers remember, we date ourselves here, maybe it's Laura, What's Your Line? It was a game show, where people had to, they didn't know who you were. And they're saying, well, do you do this and do this? And Carter had already announced his bid for the presidency. And so he's sitting in front of, I guess what we'd call celebrities today, and they had no idea who he was. My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president, okay? Yeah. So, I mean, I remember watching it, okay?
Yeah, that was that famous headline, well, I think when he won Iowa, I think, or maybe New Hampshire, the famous headline, Jimmy who?
Exactly, exactly. But, and then the comparison to Joe in that sense doesn't work at all. Joe Biden is a creature of the Democratic Party, okay, for a half century. Right. So, again, it's scoring points. I mean, it's this week alone. I think that's why you picked on this topic is just saying, all I keep hearing is about Jimmy Carter, which I hadn't heard about for a long time.
Yes, and exactly. And that's why I was thinking that why does Ingram and Hannity and the rest of the Fox crew think that this is a clever argument? I think, like, am I missing something? I don't get why this is a particularly clever argument. And particularly is because, I mean, if he is indeed this doom and gloom, and since you want the Republicans to win, why wouldn't you be happy? Yeah, like, you go ahead, keep with this doom and gloom. Yeah, keep pessimism and so on. I mean, why would you want them to drop the whole doom and gloom thesis? But again, we go back to the question. I mean, doom and gloom. In any case, I mean, what does it actually even mean to say, well, it's optimistic or it's pessimistic? I don't get it. Like, oh, Ronald Reagan had a sunny, optimistic view of America. I mean, what does that even mean? Just like, Jimmy Carter in the aftermath, as you say, of Vietnam. And, there was also the Nixon thing. I mean, leave aside Watergate, there was a kind of a reaction against the very hard-nosed realpolitik of Nixon and Kissinger, which, I think you and I, Peter, are kind of sympathetic to that. But I think for Americans, it was a little unusual for a president and his national security advisor just to say, we're not really bothered with human rights very much. We're only concerned with what's good for America. We just want peace and prosperity. And I think Carter was a reaction against that, and that was part of the appeal. Oh, suddenly we're going to put human rights front and center of our policy. He didn't do that terribly successfully. I mean, it kind of blew up in America's face. But again, that was part of that. What Carter was about. Again, reaction against the Vietnam debacle, but also reaction against the very hard-nosed Nixon-Kissinger policy.
Yeah. I have to question the good faith of Hannity and Laura, because the 1976 campaign, it was my it was my first campaign that I was aware of. I mean, thought about. I remember. I lived in Colorado at the time, and I remember staying up and watching the primaries. I was really excited about it and watching, can they stop Jimmy? I think that was like a Time magazine,
Right.
And then JC, Jimmy Carter, Jesus Christ, remember? And then those were the first memes.
Yeah. So just ABC, anyone but Carter. You remember they actually pushed Jerry Brown to get into the race. And he did get into the race right at the very end, but of course it was rather stupid because Carter had already wrapped it up by then, but it was still desperate right to the very end. There was a desperate attempt to stop Carter.
So there was a really good sense about Jimmy Carter. Okay, he was the first president that at least I know of that when on inauguration day, he got out of the limousine and he walked. I mean, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, he's walking, he's talking to people. He was the first one to do it. I mean, others have done it to imitate. Trump did it, okay? But, Jimmy Carter was the first.
Yes.
I think everybody has to remember the melees was the coming to terms with the defeat in Vietnam. The melees was the coming out of the stupor of Watergate. And as you pointed out, the economy, stagflation it was, okay? And you have to choose one awful tool to break the vicious cycle. Right. And he got caught in it. He got caught in the middle. And you and I are so consistent on the gaggle, George. When it happens under your presidency, you take the credit or you don't. I mean, and I'm not kidding. You're absolutely right. The arms buildup that Reagan inherited, it started under Jimmy Carter. Okay, if you think that's a good thing, we can talk about that later. But then again, the Mujahideen, and then we had the death squads in Latin America. So there is a continuity here. Now, really clearly, the defining moment. And I can remember being around, I was just finishing high school, going in, or my first year of college, and the hostage crisis. Now, see, that's what did it, okay? So the melees that I think that is the received memory now is that humiliation. And it was very humiliating.
Yes.
I mean, even I can remember saying, "Well, why were we there in the first place? And
Right.
why is nobody want to talk to the Shah? I thought everybody liked the Shah. No, he can't seem to find a safe harbor." Okay. Oh, you went to Egypt, and they said, "Well, you got to keep moving on, keep moving on." Okay. I mean, it was one of those moments for me that I began to realize the lies of the establishment, because they just couldn't explain things. And Jimmy Carter had his name all over it. Okay. So, I mean, the way I look at Jimmy Carter, I look at him basically favorably. He wasn't corrupt that we know. I think he did best efforts, but then he has those things like with Afghanistan and Central America.
Well, that's right, and that's of course the lasting legacy of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Because that was Brzezinski, and Carter kind of tried to balance out. I mean, he had as a Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, who was kind of an old school diplomat. I mean, he'd served in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, and he was regarded as a diplomat. He had a national security advisor as a really fanatical Cold Warrior, Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Brzezinski knew that he was playing a very dangerous game by arming the Mujahideen, and yet he did it because he thought that the Soviet Union is so evil that nothing whatever could compare with that. It doesn't matter that you give money to these absolute insane, awful people. As long as it hurts the Soviet Union, then it's good for the world.
And you're absolutely right. And this is, again, partly personality. Brzezinski always saw his great rival as Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, which I think has a brilliant mind that has done very terrible things. But his vision of détente, it's brilliant. It's like Bismarck. I mean, Talleyrand. This is it doesn't get any more intellectual than that.
Right.
So there was a rejection of that. And Carter was not a foreign policy guy.
No.
Again, it happened under his watch, and he has to take responsibility for it. But, Brzezinski always said it was about communism. We know it was all about Russia. Okay?
Exactly. All about Russia, because he was a Pole. He was a Polish nationalist, and, he had this pathological obsession about Russia. And you have to say, Kissinger, like whatever else you can say about him, I mean, Kissinger was in that Bismarckian realpolitik mode. I mean, that's how he saw foreign policy. It wasn't about, I got to get even with some great power. I mean, that's not what so I mean, they're always put together, Kissinger and Brzezinski, but in fact, they were very different in their.
Well, I mean, it's very rare. It's very rare in history where you have someone that of high intellectual aptitude and actually given a real life project. Okay, right. I mean, it is that a really amazing confluence. Okay, right. where you actually had someone that was a very, very deep thinker.
Right.
Again, I don't want to whitewash his crimes, and he did commit crimes. Okay, I'm not going to whitewash them here. But I mean, as an intellectual looking at how the global system worked, Henry Kissinger was heads and shoulders above Brzezinski by a long shot. And Brzezinski's legacy is catastrophe. And Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter's wrapped up all in it.
Yes, no, that's exactly right, and that's exactly right, and it was apparent. It should have been apparent to people very early on, 1980, that this policy of arming these absolute nutcases, and he knew this. He knew the history. I mean, of Islam, the fanaticism of Islam. So he knew that you put guns into these people's hands, it's not going to end well. And he didn't care. And that is, no question, that is a legacy of the Carter years. Now, you were just going back to the point you were making. There was also a nerdy quality to Carter. I mean, he was in his office 7 a.m. I mean, there was no, he wasn't, 9:30, he gets a polite wake up. He's in his office at 7 a.m. He would study all of the briefing books, all the papers and everything. I mean, he made a whole point of it. I don't know if you remember, there was that SNL skit where they'd have Dan Aykroyd would do Jimmy Carter. And the whole point of this, he would have this phone in, a White House phone in, and the public would call in with all kinds of ridiculous questions, like, I can't really get my new model gas heater to work. Can you help me, Mr. President? And Carter would know, yeah, I know exactly how you work this model. So the whole point, he really had a kind of nerdy quality, which is completely different from Biden, who seems to be in bed by 8 p.m.
Well, I mean, we used the term a policy wonk. We didn't use it then, but that's what he was. He was a policy wonk.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So exactly, a very, very different sort of personality from Biden. And then you were brought up the Iranian hostages. Well, I mean, that was I mean, he tried to do the decent thing. I mean, he said, okay, the Shah was very ill, so he said, you can come into the United States for treatment. I mean, he didn't know that they would seize the embassy. I mean, it's such a violation of diplomatic protocol to seize diplomats. I mean, nobody does that. I mean, it's like, no, in war, you allow the to leave the country. I mean, no one just simply seizes a diplomats, and they did that. He wasn't expecting that. And hence the hostage crisis. But there again, I mean, Cyrus Vance did the honorable thing. I mean, after that rescue attempt failed, he did resign. I mean, but look, it was a terrible situation, and it landed. Well,
the point of our whole conversation is that we're being asked to turn Joe Biden into a caricature like they have turned Jimmy Carter into a caricature. Well, you and I refuse to submit to those propositions because Jimmy Carter's presidency, well, mediocre, to be fair, mediocre presidency.
Yes.
One could make the argument maybe no one else in that position could have done any better. That's one argument you can make. And then now we have with Joe Biden, we really don't know who's making policy in his administration.
Right.
Again, I'm not going to go through the litany of cognitively limited, and I'm really kind of tired of that. All right, it's only 111 days. Right. But I think we need to understand policy better, more clarity on it, and maybe we can make the comparison. But one of the arguments I've made over the last few years is that is a successful presidency even possible anymore? And I think it's really interesting to look at that because Jimmy Carter is a caricature, but so is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's presidency is very complex as well.
I've always thought that if Gorbachev hadn't thrown the towel in for whatever reason, when the Ronald Reagan presidency had come to an end, I think it would be a very, very dubious if people had thought that this was a successful president. They would look, your policies have failed. Your policies in Central America failed. Your policies in the Middle East failed. You've got this strategic defense initiative that's going nowhere. Likable. I mean, no question.
And tax cuts and deregulation.
Right, exactly. That tax cuts, deregulation, and you're a movie actor, and people like you. I mean, it's a knack that somebody's likable. Most people aren't, but here you are. Okay, but as a presidency, I don't think you would count that as a success.
Well, and of course, all of his acolytes say he won the Cold War, and you and we contend that the Soviet Union simply opted out. So, I mean, it's kind of like a technical knockout, I suppose, but it wasn't really victory.
Yeah,
okay,
right. Yeah.
I mean, it was just that the one in the parlay decide I'm not playing anymore. Game over.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, and I think that's how the legend of Ronald Reagan arose, because up until what, about 86, 87, I don't think anybody believed that this was a successful presidency. I just, because I remember, on one issue after another, it was, I mean, even Grenada was regarded as a farce. I mean, it was a bungled military operation. I mean, all of his operations was kind of bungled. His Central American policy was a complete bungle. His Middle East policy was bungled. I mean,
Iran-Contra.
Exactly. So I don't think anyone thought, hey, this is a successful presidency. But then, boom, you had the Soviet Union, which I don't, for a variety of reasons, exactly just simply said, we're not doing this anymore. And hence, oh, Reagan won the Cold War and whatever. But it's a total myth. And again, people like Ingram, but she's not the only one, have been peddling this nonsense of, oh, Reagan won it and, Carter lost it.
And certainly one thing you can't blame Jimmy Carter for is how under Reagan, the libertarians captured economic policy. And that's where we are today, okay? That is Ronald Reagan's lasting legacy of how the libertarians captured. There are a very small number of people, very small percentage within the Republican Party that have an outsized influence, and they still do to this day. I mean, look at Larry Kudlow. I mean, he is a lunatic. He is an absolute bona fide lunatic.
Yeah. And the nice continuity to the Reagan era, because of course he was head of Office of Management and Budget in Reagan, and he had one thing only in his mind: tax cuts. And ever since then, 40 years later, he's still tax cut. Bring him on at any time. You just wind him up and tax cuts. That's it. That's all he knows. And that's what these Republicans are. And they seem to have now gone back to this warmed over Reaganism, with particularly Hannity, who seems to be saying, oh, look, our ally Israel is being attacked by Hamas. And that's because Biden is so weak. He's betraying, he's stabbing in the back our ally. And he's helping Iran. He's giving Iran money.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned this, George. So the Israelis have continued their decades-long process of depossessing Palestinians in their own, in occupied territories on the West Bank and East Jerusalem. A scuffle started, okay? Then we have, just recently, it was captured by Israeli television, of Jewish settlers lynching a Palestinian, okay? And then Hamas is reacting. And it's not getting its weapons from Iran, Sean, okay? Right. And I don't know where, I mean, his monologues are just so bizarro, okay? But I mean, my point is that, okay, fine. Traditionally, Israel is an ally of the United States in the Middle East. What exactly is Biden supposed to do in this situation? I mean, what? What can they possibly do? I mean, you want the U.S. to bomb Gaza? And the Israelis do it all the time, and why should the U.S. do it? I listen to these people, and Jim Jordan they bring in, the same platitudes, and it's just like, do you even have an idea of what you're talking about?
Right.
These people, they're talking about something that is completely invented, and it's Joe Biden's fault because he's not being like Reagan.
Right.
But when Reagan sent troops into Beirut, it was a catastrophe, and he had this horse sense to get out. So, I mean, what is the U.S. supposed to do?
Right, and of course, an aspect of it that is forgotten is that Reagan did put forward a peace plan, which the Israelis didn't like, because although it wasn't actually a two-state solution, it was moving towards a two-state solution. And of course, Israel basically did what it usually does, basically gave the finger to it. So that's a forgotten aspect of Reaganism. The Reagan peace plan was basically, the Israelis said, you take the peace plan and shove it. So yeah, I mean, the fact is Biden is in the long tradition of all American presidents of essentially the blank check to Israel. The Democrats, occasionally at least acknowledge that maybe Palestinians have some rights. I mean, of course, they're terrorists, anti-Semitic, and all sorts of other things. But they are human beings. I mean, at least that they acknowledge that. They are human beings. I mean, the Republicans that don't even acknowledge that. They're not human beings.
Well, they don't exist, George.
They don't exist.
Jared Kushner, there aren't any, so they can't be suffering.
But I mean, if you look at the readout. When Biden's conversation with Netanyahu, it's all just about what Hamas is doing. There's nothing at all about anything that Israel might be doing. You know, there's a bit of a polite saying, well, Jerusalem must be peaceful because it's a holy city for all religions. That's about that. That's it. That's the sum and substance of any attempt at balance on the part of.
But okay, you said the key word. You said the key word, and this is the lie that every administration tells and the media echoes, is that there's a balance here. No, there is no balance here, okay? One side is the aggressor and one is being oppressed. And oppressed people have the right under the UN Charter to resist.
Right.
And so they make it the Israelis are resisting. Right. I mean, this is just absolutely laughable. You know, it's always, 50-50. I'm sorry, where are Hamas's airplanes? Where's their Air Force? Right. Oh, no, they don't. Where are their tanks? No tanks. Right. Okay. I mean, you can go on and on and on, but the media is, you'll see it. If Time Magazine still exists, I'd be surprised if it does. But they'll have what's going on in Israel, because they will never say Palestine. I think somebody's got to explain to Sean that he probably shouldn't use that term. But anyway, and they'll always have the split screen. Right. Split screen. It's 50-50. No, it is not. It's 99 to 1.
But okay. In fact, I mean, it's 50-50 is not even that, because as far as the U.S. media are concerned, the Palestinians don't even get a look in. I mean, it's always entirely from Israel's perspective. I mean, they don't even go to any Palestinian scholar, to any Palestinian diplomat or anyone. It's all entirely, well, let's get the view now from the Israeli ambassador to the UN. Very interesting. That's your take. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. Show's over.
Then they'll go to Alan Dershowitz.
And then go to Alan Dershowitz. Exactly. Okay. Well, that's good. Well, boy, these Palestinians are terrible.
But I suppose they don't have Norman Finkelstein's phone number.
No, yeah, exactly. So that's always the case. I mean, that the Palestinians don't even get a look in. So, I mean, most people would be astonished when you tell them, well, there's international law. We have all these UN resolutions about occupied territories and about settlements on occupied territories, and that Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is supposed to be, the status of Jerusalem is supposed to be determined in terms of when the final negotiations. It is not matter of unilateralism somehow, Jerusalem has just been assigned to Israel. It was never assigned to Israel. It was an international city. It's been always considered an international city, and its status has to be settled in the final negotiation. So, but the interesting thing is going to go back to Jimmy Carter, because Carter actually was one of the few presidents, I mean, other than perhaps Eisenhower, who took a genuinely balanced view on the Middle East, which of course did arouse the fury and ire of the neoconservatives. I remember he even wrote a book about it. I mean, it's he didn't like what was his name?
Menachem Begin.
Menachem Begin.
First.
Got it, Menachem Begin, because Begin was a fanatic. He'd always been a fanatic. I mean, throughout his life, he'd been a fanatic, and clearly he wasn't interested in any peaceful settlement. So, but Carter actually, he took risks. He did that. He aroused a lot of hatred for attempting a more balanced policy towards the Middle East. And again, for that, he should be commended.
Yeah. So what we're trying to say here is that it's a very complicated legacy. I mean, I think I can speak for George with great assurance. I mean, I'm not impressed at all with the Biden administration, but after 111 days, I mean, I know it was under FDR. That's where it was invented, the first 100 days. It's very fictional. It's kind of a media metric. There's a lot going on right now, and a lot of bad things going on right now. What's going on in the Middle East is being totally misinterpreted to the American public as usual. I mean, this is like black and day and night. I mean, everything they're being fed is just absolutely catastrophically wrong. Okay.
No.
So Can we compare Joe Biden to Jimmy Carter? Sure, you can compare Joe Biden to a bottle of Coke too. So I mean, you know, do whatever you want.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, it goes back to the question: why do people like Laura Ingraham and Hannity think that they're onto a winning argument? I just simply don't get it. But they obviously think this is immensely clever because, you know, I'm quite sure tonight they're going to be doing the same thing again. Oh, Carter malaise. Oh, we're back to the days of Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, but I mean, but you know, but even if it descriptively has any kind of relevance, which I don't think it does, what are they trying to say? What is there? I mean, if he is Jimmy Carter, then what should you do? What is your prognosis? I mean, so for me, it's just another personal slur that feels good, and it's virtue signaling from the right. Okay.
Well, I think it's in the case of both of them is that then at some point this wonderful vision, this godlike vision called Ronald Reagan will emerge with his sunny, beaming face, and then you know, epiphany. You know, we get Ronald Reagan is here. I guess that's the idea that you know that, well, we're going to move away from these horrible Carter Biden years, and we'll be back where, you know, sunning ourselves in Ronald Reagan's vision.
Well, you know, all I can say to the Laura Ingrams and Sean Hannitys of this world: keep it up. Keep it up. And you'll see Kamala Harris president next. Keep it up. Because I don't think anyone gives a hoot or a rip.
I don't think so either. All right, Peter. We'll of course maintain our laser-like focus on you know, the Jimmy Carter meme, and I think we're going to have a lot more of that. Remember, we are now on Locals, so please look us up on Locals. You know, try and support us to whatever extent you can, and you can find
locals.com.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We're also on Rumble. Look us up on Rumble. And if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.